The slap cracked through the air like a gunshot. In the middle of hundreds of protesters and 3 television cameras broadcasting live, Officer Laura Simmons did not hesitate for even a second. She swung her hand and struck the black man, standing silently before her. His face turned to the side, but his eyes held the same calm, steady gaze. That slap landed not only on his skin, but tore through the moral mask of an entire system struggling to protect its image. He did not resist. He did not speak. He still wore his neatly pressed gray suit, a deep blue tie, his left hand holding a phone that continued recording, his right hand resting loosely at his side. 4 seconds later, Simmons spit on his shoe. Then she ordered arrest him for obstructing an officer. 2 other officers rushed in, immediately forced his arms behind his back, and the metal cuffs cut so tightly into his wrists that blood began to seep where steel met skin. 3 television networks were airing everything live. About 200,000 viewers watched a middle-aged citizen being arrested in the street for no clear reason. And that man, still silent, still eerily composed, looked almost unfazed. None of them knew that only a few hours later the entire country would know his name, and Laura Simmons, the woman who slapped him on national camera, would pay a price beyond anything she could imagine. 45 minutes before the slap, a silver car stopped on State Street 3 blocks from the protest. The man stepped out with a calm, measured gait, the pace of someone seasoned by life. His gray streaked hair was neatly combed, his leather shoes polished to a shine. His name was Edward Hayes, 61 years old. His face carried the quiet authority of someone used to steering situations with nothing more than a glance. He opened his wallet and checked the card next to his driver's license. The card glowed under the afternoon sun with its gold-embossed seal. United States Supreme Court Justice Edward A. Hayes. One of 9 people with the power to interpret the Constitution for more than 300 million American citizens. He brushed a finger across the lettering, then tucked it back into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. No one here needed to know that. Today he was not here as a justice. Today he was here simply as a grandfather keeping a promise to his grandson. He called the boy. "I'm here, Jaden. I'll record everything for your civics assignment." The boy's worried voice came through the phone. "But Mom says it could be dangerous there." Edward smiled gently. "That is exactly why I need to record it, so you can see the truth with your own eyes, not through someone else's words." He hung up, adjusted his tie, and began walking toward the crowd. Signs waved in the air, chants rolled down the street like crashing waves. Television trucks crowded the corners. Police officers lined up in formation, body armor, tight batons, ready. The atmosphere was thick with a tension that had no name. Edward stood at the edge, pulled out his phone, and began recording. He had spent 30 years debating civil rights in courtrooms, but this was the first time he attended a protest as an ordinary citizen. And in this moment he was mistaken for a potential threat. In the police line, Laura Simmons watched the crowd. Her eyes locked onto him. A black man, wearing a suit, holding a phone, doing nothing wrong, yet not looking intimidated. That more than anything irritated her. A familiar urge for control surged. She tightened her grip on her baton, stepped out of line, and walked straight toward him. What followed unfolded in less than 60 seconds. She ordered him to delete the video. He refused. She threatened him. He cited his First Amendment right to record police activity in public. She yelled. He did not move. And then the slap came down. What Simmons did not expect was that his phone, even after falling to the ground with a cracked screen, was still recording audio. All three television cameras captured every second, and deep in the pocket of the man she struck was a card that could annihilate her entire career. But he chose not to use it. Because for him, today's lesson was not meant for himself. It was meant for the generation that would come after. No one in the crowd knew, no one in the security line or the television crews had the slightest idea that the quiet handcuffed man was one of the 9 most powerful justices in the United States. But he, Edward Hayes, understood better than anyone that if he wanted to, he only needed to say 3 words, "I am a justice," and everything would stop instantly. But he said nothing, because what he needed was not privilege, but evidence. Truth does not reveal itself in political meeting rooms or in grand court halls. It appears in places where people believe no one is watching. When Laura Simmons ordered the 2 other officers to cuff him, not a single person questioned it. Everyone acted on reflex, on habit, on the belief that orders from above must be right. But only a few meters away, a young officer named Noah Brooks stood, frozen eyes fixed on the body cam screen, recording everything. 8 months into the job, he had never witnessed anything like this. The man had not resisted, had not shouted, had not caused any disturbance. He simply stood and recorded. Yet now he was being restrained like a dangerous criminal. Noah felt a knot in his chest. He knew something was wrong. But in this environment, speaking up could mean the end of a career. Meanwhile, the broadcast continued live. One of the 3 cameras caught a close-up of Edward's face at the exact moment Laura raised her hand again, this time to spit. In a news van parked 2 blocks away, veteran producer Carl Benson watched every frame intently. He narrowed his eyes. There was something about the man that unsettled him. Too calm, too composed. No fear, no defiance, no submission. Only a sharp-cutting awareness, as if he was the one evaluating everyone around him. Laura Simmons grabbed her radio and reported, "Suspect has been arrested for obstructing an officer. He attacked me. There are witnesses." Her voice was firm and decisive. In the command vehicle, Lieutenant Mark Grayson listened through his headset. He nodded slightly. Good. Clean. Exactly as he wanted. Earlier, when he saw the media cameras turning toward the growing crowd, Grayson had spoken briefly over the internal channel. "We need a deterrent image. Make it look justified." That order, which he thought was just another routine instruction during a protest, had been recorded loud and clear by the internal system. And in the cracked phone lying on the ground, the microphone was still capturing every word. Edward knew that. He had checked everything before stepping out of his car. Battery full. Recording app set to continue even if the screen locked. Every word, every sound, every breath was being saved. In the heart of Chicago, under the eyes of hundreds on the street and hundreds of thousands watching from home, a man was treated as if he had no worth. But his silence was not weakness. It was patience. Patience for the system to expose itself. Because only when darkness shows its full shape can the light shine and force everyone to confront the truth. In that moment, no one knew, not even Laura Simmons, that she had just sown the seed of an earthquake. The man she believed to be a troublemaker was the same man who had signed the ruling that stripped her automatic protection from qualified immunity if misconduct was proven through video. And now every act, every slap, every lie, every order to arrest had been recorded clearly. And there was something else Laura didn't know. This was not a personal incident. This was a lesson, and the entire nation was about to learn it at the same time. Inside the patrol vehicle, 2 blocks away, Lieutenant Mark Grayson sat in front of the live feeds from the drone cameras and news stations. He took a sip of his cold coffee, eyes fixed on the man in the suit being escorted away. "He looks familiar," he muttered, then brushed the thought aside. To him, Edward Hayes was just one among hundreds of dissenting faces that needed to be subdued. Order had to be maintained whatever the cost. In his mind, the idea of stability had long outweighed everything else, even the truth. When Simmons reported that the suspect had attacked an officer, he asked no further questions. No verification needed. Just hearing that was enough. And he issued a short command over the internal channel: increase deterrence. Make it look justified. If necessary, fabricate supporting evidence. That order, which he thought was just another line among the hundreds he had given in his 28-year career, became the first domino in a collapse he never saw coming. Because this time, the cameras were rolling. And this time, the victim was not an ordinary man. In another corner of the street, Noah Brooks stood frozen. The body cam on his chest had recorded everything from the moment Laura approached Edward to the threats, the slap, the cuffs, and the false accusation. Though he was only a new officer, Noah knew clearly that Mr. Hayes had done nothing illegal. He had stood still, filming on a public sidewalk. He had obstructed, no one provoked, no one shouted nothing. Yet here he was, handcuffed, a red mark on his face, and moments away from being pushed into a patrol car like a violent offender. Noah swallowed hard. His throat was dry. In his mind, Grayson's words from their first training session echoed, "Do not let emotion interfere with your judgment. Our job is control." But right now, he could not control the tight ache in his chest. It was not emotion. It was conscience. Meanwhile, Laura Simmons sat writing her preliminary report filled with self-satisfaction. To her, this was just another arrest, quick, neat, without complicated paperwork. A non-compliant individual refusing commands detained according to protocol. She knew exactly how to phrase it. The subject refused orders, displayed aggressive behavior, showed signs of threatening officer safety, necessary restraint measures applied. She did not mention the slap. She did not have to. Her camera had been switched off. And usually things not recorded simply cease to exist. But this time was different. Veteran reporter Carl Benson was wearing his headset, eyes glued to the monitors inside the news van. He had heard the dialogue, and from the second camera's angle, he clearly saw Laura's hand swing Hayes's face, jerk to the side, and a red mark appear. He whispered, "Damn it." He ordered the technician to save every second of the raw footage. No edits, no cuts. Preserve the timestamp on each frame, because he knew this was no longer a typical protest. This was an event, a turning point, a moment that could shake the system if exposed at the right time. Meanwhile, Edward Hayes sat silently in the back seat of the patrol car. His wrists throbbed with pain from the cuffs, but he did not flinch. He looked out the window, watching the rows of trees pass under the fading afternoon light. Each branch, each blade of grass, each building slipped into his memory as if he were documenting them. He did not need a camera. His memory was sharper than any device. The last time he had been handcuffed by police was in the year 1984 during a fair housing protest in Atlanta. He had been only 20 years old, a law student. Now he was a Supreme Court justice. But the thing being restrained today was not his hands. It was the true nature of a system terrified of transparency. And he chose not to speak, not to reveal his identity, not to call his assistant, not to activate Protocol 7, the emergency line for threatened justices. Not because he lacked power, but because he was waiting to see how far the system would incriminate itself when it believed no one important was watching. At the South Loop precinct, No one on the night shift paid special attention to the man being placed in holding cell number 3. They had seen hundreds of protest arrests before loud, aggressive, combative. But he, Edward Hayes, was too quiet, too calm. It unsettled a few of them, though they could not explain why. In the narrow cell, the cold fluorescent lights cast a pale glow across his face. The slap mark on his left cheek had swollen the deep red, spreading like an undeniable imprint. He sat still on the metal bench, hands resting on his knees, not lowering his head, not closing his eyes, not making a sound. He was simply observing. Outside, the booking officer leaned over the intake form. Name Edward answered softly, Edward Hayes. Address, he recited each word. Occupation. He lifted his head unhesitating. Attorney? He did not lie. But he did not reveal everything. The officer nodded and wrote on the form. Attorney. No one asked further. No one checked. No one searched deeper. Why should they, when the man before them was just a black man in an old suit, unremarkable, except for a silence they could not understand? The file was clipped together and placed on Lieutenant Grayson's desk. He skimmed it, nodded, and signed as if approving just another routine record. To Grayson, the situation was finished. A non-compliant subject, arrested order maintained a deterrent image captured on live television. Everything exactly as it should be. Laura Simmons felt differently. She entered the break room with a fresh cup of coffee. When colleagues mentioned the video spreading on Twitter, she shrugged. Happens all the time. Social media always overreacts. She said it casually, but her hand trembled slightly around the cup. She hid the growing unease, tightening quietly in her chest. At the end of the hallway, young officer Noah Brooks had just powered off his body cam, yet he still felt no peace. He could not shake the images in his mind. Simmons's blatant lie. The slap. The way Mr. Hayes stood silent. None of it resembled any case he had seen in his 8 months on the force. And more importantly, none of it was right. He knew that clearly. Back in the cell, Edward looked up at the wall clock. 6 hours since the moment he was arrested. 6 hours for the system to reveal its true nature. 6 hours for witnesses to write their reports. 6 hours for the media to choose their angle. 6 hours for him to watch how people treated a citizen with no visible authority to shield him. He thought of Jaden, the grandson, waiting for a civics lesson video. The boy had no idea his grandfather had been handcuffed. No idea that what was happening would become the clearest demonstration of the greatest lesson in democracy, that the power of the people is not something granted by the government, but something the government is obligated to respect whether it chooses to or not. Beyond the wall, Laura Simmons continued filling out her report. The subject did not cooperate. Displayed threatening behavior. Officers applied necessary restraint. She made no mention of the slap. No mention of the demand to delete the video. No mention of the man's expression. In her report, he was nothing more than a number, a subject, a shadow in the crowd. But she did not know that the shadow had once written the law, and that same law in a few days would place her in front of the courtroom bench. At the end of his shift in the locker room, young officer Noah Brooks sat silently in front of his personal laptop. On the screen, the body cam footage played for the 3rd time. He slowed it down frame by frame, each detail crystal clear. Simmons' hand, swinging the man's cheek, snapping to the side the moment he stiffened, without resisting, without speaking. Lieutenant Grayson's voice came through the radio sharply. Create a pretext. Make it look justified. Simmons's reply followed immediately. Understood. And then the slap. Noah removed his headset. His heartbeat quickened. A mix of anger and fear rose inside him. He knew that if this video were to be released, it would not only end Simmons's career, it would bring down the entire command structure. And as for him, he would be called a traitor. Someone who broke the blue wall, the unspoken police rule that officers must protect each other at all costs. He opened the software, connected his body cam through Bluetooth, and uploaded a copy into his encrypted personal email. He knew the central system could lose files at any moment. But if this evidence disappeared, no one would ever know the truth. He could not allow that. At that moment, his colleague, Officer Rodriguez, walked in. He glanced at the screen, clearly seeing the moment Simmons slapped the man. He did not blink, did not look surprised. He simply said quietly, "Officer Simmons, her call. You've only been here 8 months, kid. If you want to survive, learn how to not see things." Noah did not answer. He simply closed the screen, wiped the temporary history. Inside him, something had cracked. He was no longer sure he wanted to stay in a place where truth was something meant to be hidden. 3 blocks away, inside the Channel 9 news van, producer Emily Carter was reviewing all the footage. She replayed the moment Simmons approached, demanded the video be deleted, then slapped the man who stood perfectly still. She whispered, "Unbelievable." She called senior reporter Tom Lacey over. After watching the clip, Tom said only 2 words. "We were wrong." Earlier, Tom had approved the live headline protester attacks police arrested at the scene. Now he saw the truth that it was the officer who struck first, and that the lie everyone saw him resisting had been broadcast nationwide. The truth was not just different. It was a direct accusation against them, the journalists who reported it. Emily looked at him anxiously. "If we don't correct this, we'll be part of the same lie." Tom stayed silent. He knew that if they corrected it now, the audience would lose trust in their original report. But if they didn't, and the truth appeared somewhere else, the entire station would collapse. Finally, he said, "Save every raw file. Do not air it yet. We will handle this the right way." Meanwhile, on Twitter, videos filmed by bystanders began to surface. Different angles, the same moment, the slap, the false accusation, the calm face of the man being taken away. A new hashtag appeared. Justice for the man in the suit. Every hour, hundreds of thousands of shares. Everyone wanted to know, who is he? In holding cell number 3. Edward Hayes remained seated, eyes on the ceiling. He heard distant sirens fading away, doors opening and closing throughout the station. A system was telling its own story through its actions, its reports, its recordings, the ones it created itself. He did not need to speak. The truth had begun to live on its own, and he knew this time the truth could not be erased, could not be justified, could not be buried under the phrase, "It was just a misunderstanding." Not anymore. In the mid-shift break room, Laura Simmons sat frozen in front of her cup of cold coffee. Her phone screen was flooded with Twitter notifications. Her name, Officer Simmons, was climbing into the top national trends. She frowned and opened the first video. Instantly, the image appeared, her own hand striking the man right in front of a television camera. She felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands began to tremble. She exited the video, but more clips kept appearing, shot from different angles posted by different accounts. All of them showed one undeniable truth: she had struck first. A co-worker walked past, glanced at the screen, and snorted, "You're famous now. That video's already at 500,000 views." Simmons forced herself to swallow, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's just social media. This will blow over." But her hand trembled violently as she lifted the cup. The liquid sloshed and spilled over her fingers. She set the cup down, silent. On the clipboard next to the coffee machine, the temporary booking sheet was still lying open. Simmons picked it up and reread the name she had written hours earlier, Edward Hayes. Male. 61 years old. Occupation attorney. She frowned. Something felt wrong. His eyes, his calmness, the way he showed no fear. She pulled out her phone, opened Google, and typed Edward Hayes, black attorney arrested in Chicago. She had not even finished typing when Google displayed the first suggestion, Edward Hayes, Supreme Court Justice. Her finger froze above the screen. Then, as if hypnotized, she tapped it. The first page loaded instantly a portrait in judicial robes, the American flag behind him, and the gleaming gold seal beneath the headline, Justice Edward A. Hayes, Supreme Court of the United States, appointed in the year 2023. Below were article titles. Author of the landmark, ruling on police accountability, the justice behind the decision eliminating qualified immunity when video evidence exists. The next line made her throat close. Hayes vs. Metro Police Department, the ruling that reshaped the system. The cup slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Hot coffee splashed across the white tiles. Simmons stood completely still, her face pale, her lips shaking. No, this can't," she whispered. Her eyes remained locked on the screen. The face of the justice, the same face she had slapped less than 6 hours ago, now appeared clearly in the robes of one of the most powerful figures in American law. Officer Martinez from the night shift walked in. He glanced at the screen, saw Hayes's face, then looked at Simmons's expression. Silence. Then he stepped back and breathed. "Oh, God," Simmons whispered, like someone whose soul had left her body. I arrested a Supreme Court justice." She could no longer feel her breath. Her mind went blank. The phone slipped from her hand and landed beside the spreading coffee. From the station's intercom, a voice announced, "All units be advised a federal special response team is en route. Estimated arrival 20 minutes. Simmons heard it. Every word felt like a blade driving into her chest. Her knees buckled. She sank onto the tile floor amid shattered ceramic and puddles of coffee. On her fallen phone screen, the seal of the Supreme Court still glowed bright. Somewhere in the hallway, Lieutenant Grayson walked past the break room and saw Simmons's pale face. He frowned. "You all right, Simmons?" She could not answer. Her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes glassy with tears. Grayson nodded, assuming she was stressed from a long shift. He kept walking, unaware that in less than 1 hour, his own life would plummet in exactly the way he thought only troublemakers deserved. Laura Simmons sat motionless among coffee stains, and broken pieces shattered on the inside just as completely. She knew. Her life had just ended, and she had written that ending with her own hand. At 8:48 in the evening, 4 black federal SUVs rolled to a stop in front of the South Loop police station. The doors opened. 4 federal agents stepped out, dark suits pressed sharp gold badges gleaming on their left chests. Without saying a word, they shifted the entire atmosphere inside the station, confidence turning into unease routine, turning into alertness. The people with real authority had arrived, and they were not here for a meeting. At the front desk, the lead agent presented his credentials. "Agent Robert Dean, Department of Justice. We are here regarding the arrest of Edward Hayes." The desk officer blinked, stammering. This was just a normal arrest." "No," Dean replied, his voice cutting clean like a blade through paper. "It was a severe federal civil rights violation. You arrested a Supreme Court justice." The temperature in the station seemed to drop instantly. The officer stepped back and hurriedly called Lieutenant Grayson's office. 2 minutes later, Grayson emerged, irritation written across his face as he strode toward the agents. "What is this about?" "This is a local jurisdiction matter." Dean handed him a federal order. "Not anymore. The moment you put handcuffs on Justice Edward Hayes, it fell under our jurisdiction. We now require immediate access to all related evidence, including surveillance footage, body cam recordings, audio logs, and incident reports." Grayson froze. His face went pale. His hand loosened, dropping his coffee cup onto the floor, shattering like the sound of his reputation breaking apart. In holding cell number 3, the door opened. Edward lifted his head. He showed no surprise. He had known they would come. Dean stepped inside, his expression firm but respectful. "Justice Hayes, do you require medical assistance?" Edward shook his head gently. "No. Thank you for coming." Dean nodded. "We received a copy of the video and an anonymous message. Once your identity was confirmed, the entire system activated." Grayson stood behind them, drenched in cold sweat. Every word they uttered felt like a hammer striking his spine. Dean turned to him. "We are ordering the immediate transfer of the officer involved, along with all recorded data. And if you, as commanding officer, issued an order instructing your subordinates to fabricate justification, then you are also under investigation." Laura Simmons was escorted into the interrogation room. She was no longer the cold, sharp-eyed officer she had been hours earlier. Now she was a trembling figure, barely holding herself together. On the table before her, a laptop screen replayed the body cam footage from Noah Brooks. The audio was painfully clear. "Create a pretext. Make it look justified. Understood." Then the slap. Dean sat across from her, eyes locked on hers. "Your report states that the subject attacked you, but in the video, he stands still." Simmons said nothing. No argument left. "You wrote that he resisted arrest, but the footage shows he was assaulted first." She lowered her head, unable to look up. "You are suspended immediately, and you will be charged with assault under color of authority, unlawful arrest, and abuse of power." Simmons did not cry. She only trembled uncontrollably. In the hallway, Grayson was also detained. Dean read the charges aloud. "You issued orders encouraging civil rights violations. You will be investigated for conspiracy to violate civil rights, obstruction of justice, and abuse of authority." Grayson collapsed into a chair. 28 years of career now reduced to 3 charges. At the same time, in a nearby room, Noah Brooks voluntarily handed over his personal copy of the recording. The agents immediately placed him under whistleblower protection. No longer a powerless rookie, he had become the person who preserved the last line between honor and corruption. The news exploded nationwide within the hour, but not from the station where the incident took place. They were too slow. The first headline appeared on CNN: Supreme Court Justice assaulted and unlawfully detained at peaceful protest. In the interrogation room, Laura Simmons stared at the screen. Her image next to Hayes, she in uniform, he in judicial robes. The caption below, "Officer slaps Supreme Court Justice" on live television. She knew there was no escape, no justification, no authority left to shield her. Only one truth remained, and that truth was burning down everything she had ever believed she controlled. In the dark of the South Loop police station, when everyone thought the situation was finally under control, Edward Hayes stepped out of the holding cell, no longer handcuffed, no longer escorted like a detainee. He was accompanied by federal agents down the main hallway, while confused and shaken officers watched him pass. They no longer saw a supposed protester. They saw a man who carried the highest title in the American justice system, a Supreme Court justice. The bruise on his cheek was still visible, but his eyes remained unshakably steady. Just before the exit, he came face to face with Laura Simmons. She stood there being escorted to await her suspension order. Their eyes met. Simmons opened her mouth as if she wanted to speak, perhaps an apology, perhaps a plea, or simply a late flicker of remorse. But no sound came out. Because she knew no words could erase the moment she raised her hand against a man who stood still, who posed no threat, no resistance. A man she never imagined would be the one to judge her in the end. Edward looked at her for exactly 1 second. No anger, no contempt, no pity. Only a clear, direct gaze like a mirror showing her the truth about herself. Then he turned away and walked out of the station where federal vehicles were waiting. As the doors opened, a wall of cameras and flashing lights flooded in. Dozens of reporters, hundreds of former protesters who had returned the moment his true identity was revealed, all shouting at once, "Justice Hayes, will you press charges? Do you believe this was racial discrimination? What do you want to say to the public?" He raised his hand. The crowd fell silent. He spoke a single sentence. "Justice will proceed on its own through the right process, the right law, and the right people." Then he walked toward the waiting SUV, the door opening in absolute respect. Not far away, Officer Noah Brooks stood by the station entrance in civilian clothes. He watched every step Edward Hayes took through the crowd of cameras. Flashing lights reflected across the face of the man who had endured 6 hours of humiliation and silence. Yet he did not crumble. He did not invoke his title. He simply allowed the system to expose itself. Hayes passed through the crowd, then stopped in front of Noah. "Officer Brooks," he said. Noah straightened, almost lifting his hand in salute, but forcing himself to stop. "Yes, sir. I have seen your body cam footage." Noah swallowed hard. I only did what was right." Hayes looked at him. "Doing what is right is often the hardest path. You chose it without anything to protect you. That is true integrity." He extended his hand. Noah shook it, a firm, definitive handshake. Not between a justice and a police officer, but between two people who believed the truth deserved protection. "You gave me exactly what I needed." Hayes said, the truth recorded. Then he left. Noah stood in place for a long time, watching him go, feeling something awaken inside him. Not pride, but conviction. At the WKRN newsroom, Tom Lacey sat before the camera. He straightened his tie, looked directly at the lens, and began the correction. "Earlier, we reported that a protester attacked an officer. That was not true. Footage recorded by our own cameras shows the opposite. The officer struck first, and the person arrested was none other than Supreme Court Justice Edward Hayes." He bowed his head. "We apologize to the public. We apologize to Justice Hayes. We failed in our duty to verify the truth, and we will take responsibility." Silence filled the studio. Heavy absolute, more powerful than any words. And from that silence, the network began its own transformation. Online, the slap video surpassed 10 million views. The hashtag Justice for Hayes spread globally. The comments were no longer mere outrage, but calls for reform, demands for justice for those without titles to shield them. At the White House, the judicial advisor read the emergency briefing. This is no longer an isolated incident. This is a turning point. The public witnessed a Supreme Court justice humiliated not because of his position but because of the color of his skin. 3 days later, the charges were filed. Laura Simmons was indicted on 5 federal counts, including assault under authority, unlawful arrest, and falsifying official records. Lieutenant Grayson faced 3 counts, obstruction of justice, ordering fabrication, and abuse of power. The trial would be public, overseen by the Department of Justice. Noah Brooks was transferred to a newly formed Internal Integrity Division. His name was added to National Police training materials, the officer who preserved the truth, knowing it could cost him his career. But for Noah, the most important moment of all was hearing Hayes's words. "You are living proof that truth can be protected when someone has the courage to face it." And then 4 weeks later, Edward Hayes stepped onto the marble steps of the Supreme Court to address the nation for the first time. "I am not here to retaliate," he said. "I am here to remind us of something simple. Justice is not a privilege. It is a right guaranteed to all." Every word was quoted on news stations, in classrooms, in public speeches. No one dared say the incident was just a misunderstanding. No one dared claim the system did not need change. And it all began with a slap given to a man they believed was a nobody who turned out to be the most powerful person they had ever laid hands on. 7 days after the shocking arrest, Edward Hayes appeared publicly for the first time on the steps of the Supreme Court. The sky above the Capitol was a dim gray, hinting at approaching rain, yet the plaza below was packed with people, reporters, activists, law students, and those who had marched in the streets days earlier. Every gaze fixed on him, the man they had watched being humiliated, handcuffed, then quietly allow the truth to speak for itself. Hayes wore his judicial robe, his face calm. The bruise on his cheek had faded, but its impact remained etched in the minds of millions. He stepped to the podium, no notes, no aides by his side. His voice carried out deep, steady, powerful. "I am not here to demand punishment. I am here to demand correction." The crowd held its breath. What happened to me happens to thousands of citizens every year. The only difference is that I carry a title that forced people to pay attention. I have resources that compel the system to answer for itself. But justice should not depend on status or title. It must be a foundation, shared by everyone. He paused, eyes drifting across the crowd. In a distant corner, Noah Brooks stood in plain clothes, observing quietly. Edward Hayes saw him. He did not nod, did not gesture. Only a look, one of profound acknowledgement. Justice is not a weapon. It is a foundation, not meant to shield the powerful, but to protect those who have nothing except the truth. And in this incident, it was technology and the courage of individuals that brought that truth into the light. The speech was not long, but each word cut like a blade, slicing through the polished veneer of a system too accustomed to looking away. Millions watched the broadcast across television networks and social media. Every sentence he spoke became a rallying cry for nationwide reform movements. After his speech, Hayes left the podium quietly. In his hand was a petition he had personally authored, supporting a bill requiring all law enforcement officers to activate body cams in every civilian interaction and establishing a federal oversight division in departments with histories of abuse. 3 weeks later, the bill passed unanimously, something unheard of in 10 years. The press called it the Hayes effect. During that same period, Laura Simmons accepted a plea agreement. 3 years in federal prison, 2 additional years of supervised release, mandatory completion of a civil rights restoration program, and a lifetime ban from any judicial or law enforcement employment. She walked out of the courtroom with trembling hands and hollow eyes. The calm silence of Hayes throughout the incident had become the harshest judgment she had ever received, not from the court, but from her conscience. Lieutenant Grayson was different. He refused a plea deal. His trial lasted 12 days with evidence including radio recordings, falsified reports, and testimony from young officers who once feared him but now chose to stand with the truth. The verdict, 7 years in federal prison for obstruction of justice and incitement to violate civil rights. As he was led out of the courtroom, he looked back one last time, finding no former colleague waiting for him. Noah Brooks, in contrast, became a new symbol of integrity in policing. Training academies invited him to teach using his body cam footage as a model in their professional ethics course. When asked why he chose to protect the truth instead of protecting his fellow officers, he simply replied, "Because the truth is also my teammate." One evening, in a quiet meeting at Noah's small apartment, Edward Hayes paid him a visit. They sat together, two men from different generations, different paths, but united by one principle: loyalty to what is right. Hayes said, "You asked why I did not reveal my identity from the beginning. Because if I had, I would have destroyed the lesson my grandson needed to learn the lesson of how the system treats someone who has nothing but the truth." Noah nodded. He understood. The next month, Nathan Hayes' grandson delivered a school presentation titled "Justice and Democracy." In it, he recounted the entire story from his perspective: the initial worry, the shock of learning his grandfather was arrested, and the pride he felt when he saw him remain silent to prove a point. He ended with, "My grandfather taught me that justice does not come from titles, but from doing the right thing even when no one is watching. But this time, everyone was." That line became a viral clip in the education world. Hundreds of schools adopted Nathan's presentation as teaching material. And Edward Hayes, once dismissed as a troublesome protester, was now remembered not only for his position, but for the way he remained silent at the exact moment society needed to find its voice. 100 hours after Edward Hayes was slapped and handcuffed in the street, the video had surpassed 50 million views. Hundreds of international newspapers reported on it. But the remarkable part was not the numbers or the outrage. It was the chain reaction no one could have predicted. The United States Department of Justice officially charged Rachel Simmons with 5 federal offenses: assault under color of authority, unlawful arrest, abuse of power, civil rights violation, and falsifying official documents. Each charge carried a sentencing guideline of 5 to 10 years, and this time the evidence was not just witness statements or verbal testimony, but video, audio, metadata, GPS data, accelerometer data, all forming a net of proof so tight there was no escape. Not only that, Lieutenant Grayson was also charged with 3 federal counts: obstruction of justice, incitement of civil rights violations, and conspiracy to fabricate official reports. He resigned the day before his arrest, yet he could not avoid being suspended without pay, stripped of his badge, and having his entire service record placed under special investigation. At the same time, Officer Noah Brooks became widely known as a rare symbol of honesty within law enforcement. From a rookie with 8 months on the job, he became a sought-after speaker at major police academies and was invited to help create a new standard for professional ethics and evidence recording. His body cam footage became a primary training resource for new behavioral reform programs. Because of these efforts, the Department of Justice issued a federal mandate establishing an independent internal investigation unit working directly with federal agencies to oversee police departments in states with histories of abuse. Officer Brooks was invited as its first advisory member, an unprecedented decision. A federal court approved a complete reform order for the South Loop precinct, once hailed as a model of crowd control, now placed under federal oversight for at least 5 years. All cameras must remain on at all times, all data must be synced instantly to a federal server, and every officer must sign a new ethical commitment before returning to duty. Meanwhile, Edward Hayes returned to work at the Supreme Court. He held no press conferences and made no additional public statements, but his name appeared in hearings, reform documents, and state proposals seeking to eliminate conditional qualified immunity for law enforcement. Only 2 weeks later, an East Coast state passed the Hayes Effect Law, requiring all cases involving police violence to be reviewed by an independent civilian board instead of solely relying on internal police investigators. 18 other states began drafting similar legislation. In a small corner of Chicago, Nathan, the grandson of Edward Hayes, presented to his entire school a talk titled "The Justice System and the Lesson from My Grandfather." The presentation did not focus on titles, but on silence. My grandfather could have shouted, revealed who he was, demanded a lawyer. But he did not, because he wanted me to see how the system treats someone with no title and no power. Only then can the truth be seen most clearly. The presentation was recorded and quickly spread through educational platforms. Thousands of teachers shared it as a vivid civic lesson, not because of who his grandfather was, but because of how he chose silence to teach a truth his generation needed. As for Rachel Simmons, after days of denial, she finally pled guilty. The trial concluded with a sentence of 3 years in federal prison, 2 years of supervision, mandatory retraining in human rights, and a lifetime ban from any law enforcement position. She did not cry in court. But when she walked out of the courtroom with no cameras left, only her shadow stretching across the cold floor, her steps slowed. The steps of someone who once believed she was untouchable. Grayson did not have such a gentle end. He chose to appeal, but his 7-year sentence and layers of testimony and evidence made the attempt hopeless. As he was escorted out of the courtroom, he walked with his head down with no goodbyes, no handshakes, and no one remembering his old medals. Noah Brooks, after 2 months serving as an internal advisor, declined the offer to transfer to Washington. He asked to remain in Chicago as a frontline officer. "If I leave, the people who need change the most will never see it with their own eyes," he said at a short press briefing. "I'm staying because I don't want to just record the truth. I want to be part of it." 3 months later, a new video spread online. A police officer stopped a man who was filming during a protest. The officer bowed and said, "Thank you for helping us stay transparent." The man filming was startled, then nodded. The video spread not because of violence, but because of kindness. When Edward Hayes saw it, he shared it on his personal page with the caption, "This is the first sign of real change." And so a single slap a moment that seemed like nothing more than a careless act in the middle of a protest became the spark for an entire wave of reform. Not just in the justice system, but in the hearts of the public, in the mindset of young officers, in the eyes of a 12-year-old learning what justice truly means. Because justice does not begin with power. It begins with someone willing to endure injustice so the system can be seen clearly. And a system, if given the chance to correct itself, is still worth preserving. From the perspective of a specialist in systemic reform and justice, the story of Edward Hayes is not merely a wrongful arrest. It is a living test of an entire machine that has lost its direction. When a Supreme Court justice chooses silence so the system can reveal its own nature, he is not only preserving his personal dignity, he is laying the foundation for deep and lasting change. Truth does not need to shout it, only needs to be recorded. And justice, when operating correctly, will always listen to the voice carried by evidence and human dignity. It was his composure, the courage of young officer Noah Brooks, and the response of society that created an unprecedented awakening. It reminds us that progress begins the moment someone chooses to stand still to record and to refuse to look away. If you believe change is possible and that justice deserves to be illuminated, hit like to help spread that value and subscribe so you do not miss the next stories about truth and integrity. Leave a comment with the phrase, "Seen clearly," as your way of contributing to the ongoing journey of reclaiming justice for everyone, regardless of title, skin color, or social position. Because when light shines in the right place, darkness has nowhere left to hide.